Hello, friends and fellow seekers of the good to beautiful. It's Mike here, and today I'd like to read for you the prologue to Gideon's Dawn, the first book in the Pearl Song Refounding tetralogy. 2,000 years before the visitation. High Lord Gideon, Batai of Wordhaven, stood perfectly still on the singing plains, his back to the approaching storm, his heart pounding out of his chest, and shuddered. From behind him, he felt the first chilled breezes of the storm of deliverance coming from the west. Even now, at this distance, its winds cut through his white robe with ease, prickling his skin with the threat of vengeance to come. He could hear the thundering claps of the storm's multicolored lightning bolts dancing across the singing fields, taking aim, gauging the distance until they could reach him. A fragile, white-haired man standing so solemnly with the staff of Delo at his side. He did not bother turning around. He knew his path would lead him here. He planned on it for decades. But all the years of forethought and dreams had failed to fully prepare him for the ultimate finality of this moment, or the unexpected feelings of remorse for betraying those who named him High Lord. Between the echoes of thunder, he could just make out their voices, the hundreds of lords and guardians coming to retrieve the pearl he had stolen from Wordhaven just hours before. But there was no need to rush. He knew they would not come in fury like a common mob, brandishing weapons of destruction and hate. They would come with no weapons at all, save their voices. They were singing. Though still too far for the lyrics to be clear, the song's essence nonetheless pulled at his heart. It was beautiful, heavenly. But in the melodies, he could also hear their righteous fury, breathing down upon him in measured chords, and deeper still, the teary cry of their sorrow. Suddenly, the High Lord sensed a dark presence rising from the earth, pulsing, breathing, filling the air around him like a cloud of night and power. It conveyed a malevolence so tremendous he could not comprehend its depth or expanse. But within, it resonated a power and intelligence so beautifully alluring that it quickly erased all thought of the hate that fueled it. His body quivered in anticipation, despite the hundreds of times he'd felt its coming. "Sink the staff into the earth, Lord Gideon," the whisper, so smooth and pure it chilled his spine, danced above the sounds of the storm and the songs of the guardians. "And stand away." There was no face or body with the voice. There never had been. But its reality was sure in Gideon's mind and heart, sure enough that he'd slowly given up everything Wordhaven and the Pearl could offer him for the chance to have what only the voice could promise: dominion over all, especially over the Pearl itself. Now the fullness of time had come. The fruition of all that Gideon had hoped for was about to be made real. Once he did as the voice asked this day, there would be no turning back. He paused one last moment at this final precipice of choice, debating one final time whether the path he had chosen was the one he really wanted. Those who pursued him were once his friends. After today, they would feel nothing for him but an appalling disgust, or perhaps, in their arrogance, a sort of condescending pity. The voice, too, would certainly be no ally in the future. He knew it meant to use him as a puppet once the deed was done. He was hardly fool enough to believe otherwise. When this day ended, however, whatever baleful favors the voice demanded would prove irrelevant. Its alluring whispers would soon be silenced under the potent force of the pearl, whose supreme power would reside in Gideon from this time on. Only then would he no longer be consigned to live in the shadow of the pearl's glory, ever the reflection of power, but never its source. Then everyone, from the lords of Wordhaven to the lowliest soundener, would be forced to acknowledge what Gideon had come to realize for himself, that the pearl was never their deliverer, as it claimed, but rather their keeper. The High Lord raised the staff high overhead and thrust it deep within the plain. The large pearl crowning its end continued to glow, still as eerily silent as it had been all day, and seemingly oblivious to Gideon's malice. Perhaps it is not so all-knowing after all, he mused smugly. Still, as he backed away some 20 paces, he was careful to keep his gaze averted from its light. "Now, lend me your mind," the voice sang into the wind. "Just as before, quickly." Obediently, Gideon closed his eyes and faced the thickening blanket of clouds overhead. Around his feet, dark shadows began to swirl. They slowly writhed their way up his legs and torso, filling his body and thoughts with an overwhelming oppression of dread mixed with ecstasy. His body trembled under the tingly flow of the rich darkness around him. The shadows slowly coiled around his neck like a snake, hesitating ever so slightly before slithering into his ears. His eyes flew open in the sudden awareness of strength, such as humankind would never know. Holding back his breath, he wondered whether he should breathe at all, whether in expelling the air from his lungs he would uncontrollably utter the words that now spun raging in his mind. Cautiously, he let his breath escape, holding tight his lips to keep from speaking, and then quickly drew in another. His robes now reeked with the fetor of death, the inevitable result of the formless one's touch. But the stench didn't bother him. Nothing mattered now that he had the power of life and death in his thoughts, now that he could destroy the world if he chose. The words ripped through his mind, tearing slivers of his sanity, cursing the good within him wherever it hid. He felt himself severing inside, cleaving apart, as though the words were blades and his soul a shroud of thin-spun cloth. He was overcome by the dominion of the words, losing himself in the magnificent ecstasy of their pure strength. It no longer occurred to him to be afraid. "High Lord Gideon, hold there," a deep voice thundered from behind him as the singing suddenly ceased. "Stop where you are. You have taken the staff of Delo from its proper chambers. We know not your intentions in this matter, but many suspect them to be foul. In either case, the pearl must be restored to Wordhaven. We come in force, High Lord. Turn and do not speak, and no harm will befall you. Return now, Batai, or by the giver, the storm will consume you where you stand." "Never!" The High Lord turned on the lords and guardians, numbering in the hundreds before him, his eyes ablaze with the unearthly fury not fully his own. "You think me so easily subdued by your petty storm? I shall soon show you who will be consumed. Damanoi shalan richt." At Gideon's words, the storm cloud contorted. The lightning stopped. The wind subsided. and from its dark center, a rain of fire began to fall. Without hesitation, as though linked in heart and mind, the guardians began to sing again. This time, their song was different. The dark cloud churned and shifted once more and coalesced into a tornado, towering more than 120 paces into the air, but no air stirred around it. It was as though all the wind of the inherited lands had been sucked into that one churning vortex, forcing all its fury into a cone of pure destruction. No sooner had it taken shape than it raced toward the batai. But Gideon had already turned his back on the throng. His mind was filled with other matters, other words. The words! They tore at his heart, ripped through his thoughts, raping him of sanity. He felt he must speak them before they consumed him altogether, before he lost the capacity to speak at all. He outstretched his arms toward two horizons and set his glare on the pearl that yet rested so placidly, so meekly atop the staff. Even in the fury of his growing madness, he wondered why it did not speak, why it did nothing in its own defense. Perhaps what Avedon said was true. Perhaps the pearl was not so courageous as it claimed. Drawing in the deepest breath of his life, he lifted his head and screamed the words that ripped his mind away. Luciven vedestro shon ac geopolin, vedestro shon ac geopolin sic atros et acustros, damonoi teredestro shon ac todas veat. The world fell silent as the words echoed toward the east. Then the world was black. The vortex vanished. The guardians were gone. The plains turned to nothing. Gideon closed his eyes and forced his breathing to slow, calming his thundering heart. The words were gone now, expelled in the fury that had ravaged his sanity, and he felt a measure of peace return to him. After a moment, he opened his eyes, but saw only blackness. He felt suspended in a shapeless void, his words having torn away the world or having torn him away from it. He didn't know which. There was no sound save the rasping of his own breath and the incessant pounding of his heart. Deep in his mind, he wondered whether by some chance he were dead. Perhaps the voice had deceived him, convinced him that the words he spoke to destroy the pearl and draw in its power to himself might actually have done nothing more than end his own life. Or worse, banished him to some netherworld existence, a place that was not a place. Deep, stirring rage surged in him at the thought of this. But it did not make sense. The High Lord wasn't Avedon's true enemy. The pearl was. So long as the pearl lived, Avedon would be forced into subjection to it. That great spirit wanted the pearl destroyed, probably far more than even Gideon could conceive. But he needed the High Lord's body to do it. Quietly, gently, a light emerged within the void, appearing as a distant star in the night sky. He focused on it, and his heart leapt. This was the power coming to him, the power he craved, the power of the pearl. The light began to move toward Gideon, slowly at first, but then racing, faster and faster, growing ever brighter, until it silently filled his whole world. As it drew nearer, he leaned forward and stared into its immeasurable brilliance. He wanted to see the power, the limitless authority, coming to reside in him, coming to be his alone. It was just as the voice had promised, he assured himself, just as Avedon had said. But as the light came close, it changed. What was a distant star took on the shape of a flaming sword, emblazoned with pure fire that burned hotter than even the world could bear. But there was something else. Gideon could see something more than the sword. Someone was holding it. Someone more brilliant than the sun and far more terrible. And that someone was coming for him. No! And that begins the adventure of Gideon's Dawn. Hope you enjoyed the reading. The books are available at thepearlsongrefounding.com, and I invite you to step into the adventure, my friends. Thanks so much.